Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your questions about writing and also just um, have my own thoughts about writing life, and life in general, which have a way of overlapping. And today I wanted to talk about contradiction. Paradox, contradiction, character. They're all a constellation of themes that are very much on my mind today. I've been hi Nadia, hi Linda. Very much on my mind today. I just finished writing a piece for the LA Review of Books, LARB. Hi Brenda, hi Sayward. About this book, I talked about it before, called Creating Anna Karenina. So it's about Tolstoy in the years where he created Anna Karenina, and I will put a link to the story when it comes out here on my author page. But one of the things that struck me the most, hi Jill, one of the things that struck me the most about Tolstoy, besides the fact that he had terrible work habits, he had a terrible time sitting down to write. This is like an extremely familiar feeling to many writers, even the great Tolstoy, especially Tolstoy, because he had the highest of aspirations for his work. So that just made it harder. Also, he was an aristocrat. He had estates. He had children, like at least there were. He had 3 children die, 3 infants died during the period that he was writing because his wife was pregnant almost all the time, and it started to become more and more difficult. So this guy had thoughts about, feelings and thoughts, and it was hard, all the things that make it hard for you to write, it made it hard for Tolstoy to write. Also, he was an aristocrat, so he didn't have the knockout X number of pages a day kind of approach to writing the way maybe a less aristocratic person might. Somebody like Dostoevsky could write very quickly and write to a deadline. Trollope, a contemporary as well. He admired Trollope, Chekhov. People, they wrote in installations, so you could tell when they weren't writing, knocking it out, the daily page count wasn't happening, and he was a count, so he wrote when he could. He tended to take the summer off. He was a very busy guy, but when he was in it, when he sat down to write and it was coming, he could knock out a chapter a day. I mean, he really could work when he was working. He had his wife was very much a partner and collaborator with him, so he would write something in the daytime and she would copy it over at night, so he would have a clear copy for the morning. So she was intimately involved with his work. And he doubted himself tremendously. He doubted, even as he was working on Anna Karenina, he doubted that it was any good. And then he would ask for people's opinions, and then he would hate himself for wanting praise. He was a man very much at odds with himself, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, is our contradictions, how we how we kind of have to navigate our internal contradictions to produce our work. And one of Tolstoy's great contradictions, which I think eventually, hi Alden, I think eventually stopped him from being the novelist that he was, that he ended up stopping writing fiction. No more. There are no more great novels after Anna Karenina. He wrote a bunch of philosophical tracts. He did write some short stories, which were large, because he was Tolstoy. But he was a man who was at odds with himself. And his contradictions, there were a lot of them, but one of them is how do you write when people are suffering? How do you write art when people need, when there's a famine in Samara and there are people suffering? How do you, why write fiction at that point? Isn't it more helpful for them to get food into Samara? How do you justify making art when people are in need? And that was a struggle for him. Conscience, he was a man who was often, guilt dogged him as a human being. He thought that our efforts to resolve conscience with our daily lives, that was like the big project for him. That's what he thought was worth doing in life. But it eventually ruined him as an artist. The struggle between wanting to be a moral person and do the moral thing, and just being a person with the flaws that people have as well as their strengths. That tension reached kind of a peak with Anna Karenina, where they were both feeding and pulling at each other, and then afterwards just pulled him apart and he stopped writing. And I'm a great believer in, if anybody knows me, which some of you are starting to, that we do, like Whitman says, we do contain multitudes. We do contain the angelic part, the highly conscious part, the selfish part, the the self-controlled part, and the lustful part, and we have all these aspects of ourselves. And you can, it's like the tension between trying to be good and accepting the self as you are is an ongoing conversation inside of us. And the tension between the two, or the acceptance of the whole thing, is the engine, as a writer. I mean, that's the big stew pot that you're dishing up. If you didn't have that kind of movement going on, I wonder what kind of fiction a person who was sure, just completely calm, sure of themselves, had it all sorted out, I don't know that they would be writing fiction. It tends to be people who are, the balance is an active balance. It's a balancing, or a dance, if you want to have a different metaphor. It's a dance between the parts of yourself. I think what happened with Tolstoy is that it just became too painful to do that dance. But that as writers, hey Joanne, as writers we want to, I think, just always noticing how it's affecting our writing. I wrote Paint It Black about a lot of it, or some of it, is about the question of perfectionism and permission. Michael, who opens the book as suicide, is a perfectionist, as is his mother, who's a concert pianist. That there's no upward end to how good, if you're an artist, how good you can be. And he suffers because all perfectionists suffer, because there's no such thing as perfection in the physical world. And that's quite an onus to put on yourself as an artist. Then there's Josie, our protagonist, who is a punk rocker. And the idea of punk rock is you make a sound, make a noise. You don't have to be Yo-Yo Ma to play an instrument. I mean, you could bang away on the guitar in the garage in the punk band. And the point was to make a sound, to make that presence something. And that's permission. And most artists are always balancing. I know that's why I wrote it. I mean, obviously my own concerns is, how do you balance perfectionism and permission? Because too much permission and you just get a bunch of garbage. Too much perfectionism and you can't work at all. I mean, Tolstoy had what we would call writer's block a good deal of the time. I mean, he was publishing Anna Karenina in installments, and sometimes the installments were 8 months between installments, when they're supposed to be coming out every month. He did not care about that. He did not sympathize with his editor. He could have cared less, because the most important thing to him was the artistry and the how honest and how deeply felt his work was. And I don't mean in a sentimental way. He was not a sentimentalist. He did not spare his protagonist or any of the other characters from terrible blows. He was a realist. He was the great realist. I mean, this book describes him going. He was a sensitive guy, but he would go, if anything was happening in the area, he would go. Like if there was an autopsy, if there was a guillotining, a woman who was the mistress of a local landowner threw herself under a train in the local area because she was being sent aside. And he went to the autopsy of that. I think part of it is class privilege, that, the Count could go wherever he wanted to go, and they would let him. But also, as a realist, we've talked about keeping our notebooks. As a realist, he wanted to see things. He wanted to know things. The more he could know about the world and about life, the better. And he was willing to take that on. And as I've said, that's one of the things that we should all be taking on. If only in the context of the book. If you need to go to see an autopsy, find a way to do it. This pandemic makes everything more difficult, but this will be over. And in the meantime, you control what you can, and you write as truthfully as you can. And you try to be physically present in the body. That's this class that I'm going to be teaching with the community of writers on the 9th, 10th, and 11th of October. So if you're interested in that physical reality, write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, saying that you want to. They're fixing up their announcement right now, but that way I can put you on a list and make sure that you know, like, early on. So the idea anyway is that everybody has these contradictions. How good is this? It's not good enough, and then that sets up obstacles. And what I found in this in writing this essay about creating Anna Karenina is I always return to Whitman because, like Whitman, Tolstoy he was so many people. He was so many things to so many people. He founded 70 schools. He wrote papers on educational reform and how one should teach a class, and he taught his own children. Um, he hunted. He was super obsessed with buying horses and land. He suffered from depression at the same time as all of this activity. He had all those children, this close collaboration with his wife, extended social circles, and this artistic life of the highest quality. And many of the things pulled at each other. He was not as good as he wanted to be or as he felt people should be. And eventually that kind of tore him apart. I think that prevented him from continuing to be the artist that he had been. And again, I go back to Whitman, who says, I contain multitudes. And that's all right. That is a good thing. That is, I can understand, so many aspects of life because I don't reject the pieces of those things in myself. And Tolstoy was torn apart by the fact that he didn't want to be all that he was. He didn't want the multitudes. He didn't want to be this and that and that and that. And the more that we can accept that we are always dancing with the different aspects of ourselves, the angels and devils are dancing together. And the idea is to keep the dance going, to not freeze the action or think that we should be, better than we are, being too judgmental of the self. It's not bad to handle those questions, but then to think that we have to be all the best. It cuts off half your experience because you have a lot of experiences that are more on the shadow side. You can have two thoughts about the same instance. There's something happens to a friend of yours, and you can both be on the angelic side and think of only the best things, but then you also have other thoughts and how did they, in a certain aspect, they did bring it down on themselves. In a certain aspect, you're angry at them as well as empathetic and grieving. And to be able to accept all those aspects is what makes a good writer. I think that the difficulty is we have kind of a superstitious attitude towards negativity, negative thoughts, and so forth, rather than seeing them as part of the whole. I shouldn't think that because something terrible will happen. It's sort of superstitious, but it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you have that part of you, just like your characters are going to be able to give that much more complex world to your characters if you can contain multitudes instead of dividing off and saying, oh, that's bad. I can't write about that because people will think I'm a bad person. Well, no, that's the nature of artistry, is that you have access to all of it. And I know for myself in times like this, when I'm trying to fight a lot of depression, negativity, all that stuff, how to handle that material without going too far into that side of the dance. That I can have those thoughts, but as long as I don't get stuck there, it just becomes part of the stew, part of the thing, rather than, oh, this is just going to bring everybody down, and that's not my purpose here on earth, is not to just depress the hell out of everybody. But if you can express some negative or, darker thoughts in the welter, your people feel seen. People whose own darker thoughts they've been keeping to themselves, and they see it, and it's like, oh yeah, that is something that's true. That's something that I'm thinking too, and especially as part of a larger thing. So, it's not, you're not going to be punished for having those bad thoughts, like, a little kid whose mouth is going to get washed out with soap. But not for mental health's sake, or for the health of the art. If you decide what art is for, is it if it's for helping us experience our humanity, which is what I think it is. Well, our humanity isn't all Pollyanna. It is not all zippity-doo-dah, silver lining and all that. But it's the balance. So the beauty of the silver lining is the fact that you can find it in the mix of, dark times and things happening, that there's a sliver, and then you've seen it, you add that to the mix. So the line, as we're saying, like the line between your work and your inner life is non-existent. I urge you to embrace your multitudes. Embrace the whole thing. It's all you. It's all the human condition. Don't cut off part of the keyboard of the piano and say, whoa, not going there. People won't like that. It's like, no, it's the art is playing the whole keyboard and having it available to you. And if you're resisting having, kind of sterner thoughts because you're being self-protective, think about that you can go in and go out. You don't have to just play the dark keys either. But you're looking for an expression of humanity throughout. So there's a bunch of questions coming in while I've been talking. So now I'm going to go back and pick those up. Okay, this was when I was talking about Tolstoy's poor writing habits. Oh, he just struggled. Linda says, I know as beginners and newbies we have to write about 3 pages to find one good sentence. Does that ever change? Yeah, you get better. You do get better as you go. And you start writing more good sentences to begin with. In 3 pages, one good sentence should throw you back into the 3 pages, going, what else could I sharpen into a better sentence? Think better is always helpful. Does a published, seasoned writer like you still have to write vast volumes to get something you're happy with? No, because I will go back and shape things. And sometimes the more you work, especially doing the sense work, doing the sentence exercises and things that we've played with, your sensitivity becomes so much better. Do you have to make 10 bad dinners for one good one? No. As you make that good dinner, you start to learn things that you end up not making bad dinners anymore. Although maybe only one of them will be like incredible. That you learn. So it's not just repetition. You are taking on more information. So yes, you do get better as you work. So Sayward wants feedback from writers more advanced, but there's a feeling in the writers community that we shouldn't bother more advanced writers. That's interesting. Well, obviously teachers are teaching because they are wanting to share information. And people in writers' conferences, like the Community of Writers and many others, people become involved because they tend to be interested in sharing and helping people. The most important thing is always to be very specific in your question. Not, will you read 10 pages of my work and tell me what's wrong with it? That's putting a lot of responsibility on somebody who you don't even know, who is working on their own stuff. But if you say, I'm having trouble with this, or, I admire your work, I admire the lyrical quality of your work, can you tell me, recommend a book or a couple of, novels that might help me understand how to put that together better, things like that. So just notice what you're asking and who you're asking. Some people are just grumpy, and they don't want to hear from you at all unless they're actively, teaching. So it is, the more you see them on social media, those tend to be people who are willing to be approached. So it's like, what are you asking them? Nobody wants to read your manuscript. That's asking too much of people. But you can ask specific questions, and people are usually, just think of what their time is and what's your relationship. And that should, because there's every kind of writer, just like there's every kind of human being. So the more they seem to be approachable, the more they are. I went to a party once, and there was a guy wearing a kilt. It was a Christmas party. This handsome old guy, long white hair, wearing a kilt. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to go talk to that guy. And my husband was like, you can't talk to him. That's Richard Thomas, who's a famous guitar player. And I'm going, listen, a guy who wears a kilt to a Christmas party wants you to talk to him. Just some people are just more extroverted. So Brenda says, didn't Tolstoy begin writing religious tracts after Anna Karenina, during and after especially, he began to be more religious and trying to solve his problems with, by becoming more and more conservatively Christian, Orthodox, and he lost his artistry. So that was after. That's what I'm talking about, is he started writing philosophy instead of fiction. Because what was the quote from the book? He was somebody who, in writing expository prose, writing philosophy, he tended to agree with himself. Yeah, that's right, whereas fiction is discovery, and you have to let go some of your opinions in favor of what's actually happening. So it didn't do him any good to be writing those religious tracts. Hey, Joanne. Okay. So sounds like Whitman was unable to enjoy what he had. No, that's Tolstoy. He made, trying to be too good is a recipe for sorrow, whereas as a human being, to embrace your multitudes is sanity, I think. Brenda asks, is it a problem when a character contains multitudes? The character contains multitudes. That's different than the creator. You want the creator to contain multitudes. Characters, usually, we take pieces of ourselves. That's why it's good to contain multitudes, because a character contains multitude. The author contains the multitudes and then hands out pieces of themselves to different characters. So the character in that Tolstoy book, the guy said Tolstoy could imagine Levin, who is one of the characters in Anna Karenina, but Levin could not imagine a Tolstoy. So you give out pieces. You tend not to have a multitudinous, too variegated character. Character has like prominent fixed character or semi-fixed characteristics. Some of them can change as the book goes along. But if you have too many parts of a personality as a character, the reader cannot take it in. There's not a firm image of that character. So I concentrate on their major characteristics. And you can give them little pieces here and there. But if they don't have like those big major things, you can't feel them. You don't know what's going on with them. Is there a way you've handled this? No, I really recommend, characters are different than human beings, and the multitudinous character is a real problem. I wouldn't do it. So that's just but if you guys have an idea, an example of somebody who has many contradictions and is different all the time. Tolstoy was different in every letter he would write. He had different correspondence, and you'd read those letters, and the correspondence with this person is very different than the correspondence with this person. It's almost not the same person. But it's aspects of the same person. With characters, you want central qualities. Oh, well, thank you, Joanne, for enjoying this. Let's see. Any mention of upcoming workshop? It hasn't been posted yet, Ruthie, but it will be the 9th, 10th, and 11th. And if you write to me through I think I have your name, but if you write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, then I'll have your email, and I can make sure that there's a list. And then when I know that it's going out, an announcement is going out, I'll quickly let you guys know first, so you'll get the edge on enrollment. Here we go. Sayward says, some people are grumpy indeed. I don't know. I don't really approach anyone because I'm worried I might make a mistake in asking. You never know. Your relationship might be in the future. What your relationship might be in the future. Yeah. It depends also where you are. You know, if you're at a writing conference, if you're at AWP, you know, if you're at the Community of Writers, if you're at one of these big events, those people expect to be approached. If they are there to be approached. You know, only a complete jerk would go to an event like AWP and then be pissed that somebody would talk to them. That's what they're there for. If they don't like people, they'd stay home. And everybody, you know, writing a fan letter is always, you know, that's always a really good way to approach a writer, not asking anything, just noticing something interesting about their work always gets a writer's attention. Not asking anything. And then you could ask, you know, maybe one question, you know, something they don't have to do anything about, just answer a question. It's not, but do not say, can I send you my manuscript? That's the bridge too far. You know, who's your agent? That's a bridge too far. Linda wants a book recommendation, interested in sentence diagramming. A basic grammar book. Mine is just called, I have two of them. I'm just going to grab them off the shelf here. So this is the one I like the best. It's ancient, but you could probably get it on ABE Books, which is used books. ABE.com. This is College Outline Series English Composition. And it's published by Barnes & Noble Books. So that's how old it is. a division of Harper Row, by Vivian and Jackson. That's the last names of the two editors. Vivian and Jackson. This is 1961. Sentences haven't changed. So this is the one I use, and it has a wonderful chapter on sentence diagramming. Really good. So that's the one I use. Obviously, the cover's fallen off. Then I also have this one, Heath's College Handbook of Composition. So you're looking for a comp book that has sentence diagramming. Let's see if this one has sentence diagramming. This one's a good one too. Very useful. But I don't believe it has diagramming. It's sort of dictionary style, which is never my favorite. I like a good index. Oh, here we go. Diagramming sentences. I don't see anything about diagramming sentences, but they have all the things that you want to know about dependent clauses and so forth. So this is a good one, but this is the one that I actually use the most. The English Composition College Outline Series, Barnes & Noble, Vivian and Jackson. All right. So anything else you'd like to know or have thoughts about? I am all yours at the moment. It's very good to get sentences from books that you admire. If you're interested in diagramming, diagramming sentences is kind of like translating. It's more of a puzzle or a game. What's really interesting is to take a sentence of something that you really admire, to take a Styron sentence. Styron's a tremendous, he writes these huge, muscular, complex sentences, and take one of them and try to diagram it. You're not going to get an F, nobody's grading it. So just the attempt to diagram it is really interesting, and to see how the levels and how it's put together. It's just like going under the hood of a car and seeing how, tinkering in there, seeing what's going on. Vivian and Jackson from 1967 is on sale at Amazon for $480. Well, that $478. Yeah, go to ABE Books, which are used books, and I'm sure that you could pick that thing up for $3. I'm saying, we'll see. Because they've got to have published godzillions of them, and people marked them up and then got rid of them after they got out of college. So there should be a ton of used books. Could you talk about coming up with original characters? Where to start? That is a fabulous question. For me, they're usually an aspect of myself, some specific aspect of myself that joins with people that I've known, and characters in usually films. The actor, I can picture the actor and how they move, and kind of a physicality. I'm more likely to use an actor than somebody I know, because then it becomes too much the person that I know. Often I'll kind of do a mashup of 2 or 3 people that I know, and give a character like this one's physicality and this one's say wit or sarcasm or, attitude. And then maybe a bit of this one's vulnerability or some aspect of themselves, kind of smush them together. And then sometimes, and then adding in maybe, like if I don't mean just taking somebody's character and stealing the character and putting him in a new situation. Although if you do that and write it in your own language and stuff, only you will know that it really is Stanley Kowalski. But it's like this guy is sort of Stanley Kowalski, and he's sort of Brando-ish, So I'm using aspects of Brando in that. But then there's some aspects of Brando that I'm using that are actually pieces of myself. That's why I recognize them so strongly. So that character is infused by what Brando does with his artistry, characters he creates, that there are aspects of that respond to images and situations and character, part of my multitudes. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that scene in Last Tango where he's talking about how his father made him shovel shit before his date. I've mused that way. I can see that, how that continued to fester in the adult, and that might go into another character. So it's, you always start somewhere. I don't ever create something or someone out of thin air. That's what I call neck up writing. It's just, what if we take that person from this movie and put them in that situation? It's a neck up thing. It doesn't get down to the materials that you are made of. So it's usually taking pieces of yourself, things that you worry about, aspects of yourself that, what if I was this but more sexier or braver, smarter? What if this had happened to me, as a child? Who would that person have been? Oh, it's sort of like this, and sort of like, and I can, So you develop a character, and you get to know them, and they start walking around, and that's really interesting. How do you develop them? By writing out sketches on paper, play acting what they might say. How do I develop them? I usually have a really good sense of who they are to begin with, and they start talking. They have their own voice. Like, that's the most important thing, is to find the voice. How do they phrase? What is their education? What are the things they're interested in? How do they respond to frustration, say? What are their issues, their central issues? I use that Logos Egri, The Art of Dramatic Writing, that three-dimensional character study. When I get to the end of what I know about them, and usually that's about 80 pages in, I'll run out of what I know. And then I will ask them questions. I'll make a list of questions things I don't know about them, and ask them. Or ask somebody who ask their father, ask their brother what they know about them. And then that's what does it for me. That gets down into who they are. And I'm about there with the character again, with the character in the book I'm writing right now, the protagonist. The protagonist is the hardest one to get, because you see everybody else through their eyes, and so everybody else is simpler than they are. They tend to be the more complex characters, the more, where's that person's conflict? What are their characteristics? And then what is the situation putting pressure on those characteristics that they'll be forced to change? So Joanne, can you talk a bit about thinly disguised characters could be easily recognizable. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I wrote 3 cathartic novels about our local small town antics but couldn't publish without getting sued. Okay. This is called a roman à clef, which is when you write about people that can be easily recognized. This is my absolute terror, and I do the very best I can to conceal identities if there's somebody I have particularly in mind. Physicality, change the physicality. Pick an actor, an actress, actor, somebody else that you know extremely well. I like using actors because I can look at their pictures online. And give them a completely different physicality. Very, very important. So if I'm writing about, say, my brother, I am going to find an actor who looks nothing like my brother, behaves nothing like my brother, and give that character, maybe even change the sex, change the age, change the, whatever you can change about them to conceal who they are. I think that, if you have a town that you're writing about, can you change the, usually location is the hardest thing to change for me. If I was writing about a small town in Colorado where I used to live, it would be the hardest thing for me to do is to change that little town in the, sort of western mountain town, and put it in Pacific Northwest, or put it in New England, because I know more about that southwestern town and could write more interesting stuff about it. So I would probably leave the town, give it a different name for sure, and just be really careful to change as much as I can about the character, different background if I can, if it makes sense. And then sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and know that people are going to be angry, and just figure a lot of people aren't literate and won't read the book. And then sometimes people get mad, and later on they'll be telling other people, that's me. So Kimberly says, I find the more I work revising the characters, they become more dimensional. Yeah. Because you start out knowing a certain amount, but by the time you're done with a draft, you know so much more about the character that when you go back into the next draft, it's like, oh yeah, I know what's happening with her here. How, what more can I say? What more can I do here? Makes it interesting. Hey, Zunate. Greetings. Do you think it's a problem when the author is unable to see the protagonist or other central characters in their mind? Yes, that is a tremendous problem, because you need to be able to describe them. Usually the protagonist is a little hazier than other characters, because their protagonist is your camera, and the camera doesn't examine themselves. But it is really good to pick a specific figure, and it can be somebody an actor who could play that part in a movie in your mind, so that you can look at pictures of them and describe things. Even like Marina, who is definitely a first-person character, but I gave her a certain characteristic, physical. I don't actually. I could used somebody, an actress in one of her roles, that gave me like my first physical sense of her, but I also combined her with with a couple of other physical specimens, physical people, to give a picture. So it's a little bit faceted, but I needed to be able to say, for instance, she's a redhead. It's a revolution, and she kind of has the revolution internally. And I made her a redhead, but I made her a dark-eyed redhead. She's not Irish. She's Russian. So these dark-eyed redheads, and she has sort of round eyes that are kind of clownish, kind of like a Norma Talmadge kind of character. And so I gave her physical characteristics so that I could look at this actress when I'm describing her. I can describe, sometimes I'm describing her by comparison to something or someone. People react to her in a certain way. She sees herself in a mirror. You can't get away from that in first person, generally speaking. They do end up describing themselves. And, so to have a fixed image is really helpful. So I think they're not just an idea or a feeling. At some point, to give them physical reality is very important. My character was a tightrope walker when she was a kid, like slack rope. So I use that as a metaphor. There's a lot about a character that you use as a metaphor. You use their vocabulary. It's based on who they are, what they're like. But having a stable image is like, is your character small or tall? How they embrace another person depends on how tall they are. Do they embrace them around the shoulders or around the waist? When they hug them, are they pressed up into their chest or are they next to their ear? How would you know unless you have a physical... There's so many... You're limited unless you do know, what they are like physically. What about well-known characters from history interacting with your fictional characters? How do you disguise that? I don't. If you're using historical characters, why... you might want to change their names. Say if you have... you're writing a novel about a Senate intern and a certain relationship they have with their senator, you might not want to limit yourself by saying Lindsey Graham. You could call him, Graham Stanley, and give him the characteristics of Lindsey Graham that people who are interested in that kind of thing could recognize him, in the glassy blue eyes and the, supercilious this and that. You'd recognize him. And call him something else. You certainly could. But generally what I do, like with the two historical novels, Marina M. and Chimes, is it's important because it's a historical novel. And you want to know who the players are, the actual players. So I don't disguise anybody in the minor characters. Gumilev is Gumilev, and Mayakovsky is Mayakovsky. But the characters who are closer to my character, the fictional characters, might resemble certain people, but I make them entirely their own characters. So minor characters are historical, major characters are fictional. So when I have Gorky, who is a big part of Chimes of Lost Cathedral, Maxim Gorky, I take liberties and I do my research. I know about as much of Gorky, as I possibly can. So when I portray him, it's going to be accurate, and somebody who's really into Russian literature will go, yeah, that would be likely something he would say. That would be likely something he would do. I can portray that realistically. But usually the major characters are made up, are totally fictional. They're based on real people, but I wouldn't give them that big a role because I would feel like I was violating who the person really was. Is plot something you invent outside the characters with a life of its own, or is it generated from the character? As in, we attract the problems based on the quality of our inner life. Yeah. I write character-based fiction. So character-based fiction is where you take a person, a character with certain characteristics of who they are. Proud, loyal, hardworking, takes orders well, good on a team, friendly, whatever they're like. And then you put pressure on those characteristics. And some of them will hold the character in good stead, and some of them will have to change based on the stress of the situation you've put them in. So, say Alien, the Sigourney Weaver character in Alien, Riley, has those characteristics. Good team member, team player, safety-oriented, rule-based, loyal, good in command, good in the chain of command, good soldier. And what happens is she is the one who has to finally, she has to lead. She has to stop being a team player and start commanding. So the stress of the monster, whatever, the invasion, puts pressure on her, and some of her characteristics hold up, her strength and resourcefulness and so forth. But that team player, follow the rules, good soldier thing flips so that she becomes the commander and is able to slay the dragon or whatever, deal with the monster. So character-based, when character X, with all their characteristics, finds himself in situation Y, which is the situation that puts pressure on their characteristics, then your story is what happens. Are we safe? Hi, Pam. Are we safe if the historical characters are dead? See, I come from a background in history. And in history, everybody's dead. But you have other historians who are alive. And they are going to read this, and with they're going to read this with the knife sharpened, ready to slice and dice if you get things wrong. They'll go, oh, no, that's not Zinoviev. He wasn't like that at all. You don't know what you're talking about. Never wanted that. Nobody ever did that with my books. Said that I got the research wrong, that I got the personality wrong. So are you safe? Do you want to be safe, or do you want to get it right? You can, people might say he never was there. He was never there. You put a historical character in a situation where he wasn't. Well, go ahead. You're safe doing that. It's fiction. You're allowed to put them somewhere that they could have been but weren't. But, you can't put them, Lenin didn't go to Hawaii during the Russian Revolution. Then you're just getting into speculative fiction. So always think about making it realistic. It doesn't have to be absolutely ploddingly true, but it needs to be realistic. And not completely contradicting what actually happened, unless you're writing speculative fiction. But you're much safer if they're dead. Yeah. But history people are very, tied to the truth. So you're always dragging that over. That's kind of the burden of historical fiction, is you don't want to be taking it too cavalierly. There are things that I just can't stand, like this supposedly Russian TV show about Catherine the Great. I think it's called The Great. I just couldn't watch it. It was just like, I was, no, I just was not prepared to go there. It was so historically inaccurate and so characterologically inaccurate, and the diction was, I mean, the whole thing was just like somebody's, you know, bong soaked fantasy. I could not. Could not. What else? Yeah, historical characters, you know, I'm a realist. I think that's why I was so attracted to that Tolstoy. As I'm a realist, I want to give you a world that is very much like the one we live in. I'm, you know, I write history. I mean, I write fiction, but I want to represent the world that you would recognize. So history is where I live, Pam says. Well, that's where we all live. I mean, there's speculative fiction, you know, what if Hitler had won the war? What if, you know, there's a lot of speculative fiction that just changes something major, and then everything changes. But if you're writing about Lindbergh becoming a president of the United States, you still want it to be Lindbergh. You want people who know who Lindbergh was and have some familiarity to read it and go, wow, what if he had, wow, this could have happened. Rather than like, yeah, right. Cool. Let's see, how are we doing? Well, I think our time has come to an end. And I want to thank you for joining me, and write to me if you're interested in that sense class. I don't know what they're going to charge for it. You know, maybe it'll be 10 hours of instruction. So, you know, I assume it's going to be in the $250 range. So start saving up if you want to do it. And write to me through my website if you're interested in getting a heads up, and I'll have it on my page here too. All right, well, thank you very much, and good writing to you.